At the Meadows Church, we believe who we are and what we do is based upon our beliefs of who God is and what He's done for us. This is the gospel. God is the Father who made us His family. God is the Son who saves us and calls us His disciples. God is a Spirit who sent Jesus and now sends us as missionaries. We are a family of missionary disciples. And therefore we do four things. We gather on Sunday mornings. We go as missional communities. We grow as DNA groups, and we give of ourselves, our time, our talent, and our treasure. We are the Meadows Church. Therefore, we ask you to join us as we join Jesus on His mission to see the gospel transform lives in our neighborhood of Church of Meadows, our city of Mississauga, and all around the world. Welcome to the Meadows Church Online. My name is Pastor Graham, and I just want to welcome you here this morning. Wherever you're watching from, we're just excited that we are here together. Again, it's not the same as being in person, but I'm so grateful for this ability to use this platform, regardless of the circumstances. And so we want to just welcome you here. Please, as always, use the chat section. Let us know that you're there. Let us know you're watching. It's cool to see numbers on the screen about how many people are watching, but let's put names to those numbers and just welcome you here. We care more about interaction than we do about how many people actually watch this video. And so please let us know that you're there. Hopefully you're enjoying this May long weekend. It was a great day yesterday. Hopefully you're spending some time with your family. Obviously, it's still unique in this COVID situation, but we are excited to see what God is doing as we begin to see things reopening in the weeks and the months to come. We got a great service for you. We got some songs, we got teaching, we got prayer, we got announcements, just exciting things about what God is doing. But also, we want to start off with something a little new and unique. We actually have a message that was sent in from two people that hopefully you know and love dearly, Peter and Valerie Limmer. They're missionaries in Okinawa, Japan, and have been connected with our church ever since the beginning of our church. And so we want to just let you watch their little update, sharing with what they are facing in their ministries with this COVID-19 situation. So here, take a look, enjoy, and use this as a reminder to be praying for them as they minister and share the gospel throughout Japan. Here you go.
Hi, we're Peter and Valerie. We're missionaries in Okinawa, Japan. We just wanted to send you a quick update about what's happening here. The world is really different than it was 3 months ago when we left Canada. God's timing, however, is perfect to get us here just before everything started to shut down, including flights. We know of a missionary in Canada right now who desperately wants to return to Japan, but is unable to.
Over the past several months, we've been receiving lots of questions on the impact of coronavirus in Japan and how we're doing in ministry within the current situation. So let's just start with giving you a bit of an update on coronavirus in Japan. The governors here are very limited in their powers to impose restrictions on people. They can politely request that they self-isolate or quarantine themselves within their homes, but there are no legal penalties for non-compliance. There are no fines or anything like that.
You'll see here the number of cases in Japan. Quite a number of people have already recovered from coronavirus. One thing to note is the low testing rates. Per capita, it's about 1/17 the testing rate of Canada. Because of the low testing rate, it's really difficult to know the true state of the situation here. So all we can do is look at the map and see which areas have more or fewer cases. So the darker areas in this map indicate more cases. You may have read in our newsletter that the church closed ahead of the government's request for voluntary lockdown. We've been in voluntary lockdown for about 1 month now. In Okinawa, there have been a total of 143 confirmed cases of the coronavirus. The population of Okinawa is just over 1 million people. The governor announced that on May 14th, non-essential businesses and activities are free to open up as long as we use caution. He was able to announce that because there have been no new cases for the past 13 days. Also, schools are slated to reopen next week.
During lockdown, we've continued to carry on with a variety of special projects, such as translating some of the Bible teaching materials that we created a few years ago into other languages so that other missionaries can use them as well. At first, we thought that we would teach our ESL classes remotely, and we had even prepared lessons and tested the technology to make sure everything worked. But when we contacted the parents of the students, we realized that it wouldn't work after all, not because of any technological limitation, but because of the cultural aspect of how Japanese people use technology. So in North America, we usually think of Japan as a technologically advanced society, and they are. But the average Okinawan person usually uses their phone and not really a computer or a tablet at all at home. In fact, one really good illustration of the difference in the technology usage is that right now in Tokyo, where many people are working from home remotely, desks are sold out because everybody is having to go out and buy desks and computers because they didn't have those things at home before. Because the average Japanese person interacts with technology very differently than a Canadian person, we've been engaging in a lot of trial and error through this time, just making test videos and materials and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And we've been trying to engage them really on their terms and learning even what those terms are. So this time has been a lot of learning about the kind of hidden aspects of the Japanese culture that weren't really apparent to us before coronavirus made technology so front and center. While we've been in lockdown, we've been creating and publishing a variety of video church services using the YouTube channel that we created for Seaside Chapel. The Japanese love to watch videos on their phones, so we've also been making a lot of videos to celebrate certain things like Mother's Day or birthdays and so on. Before the governor's announcement, we were also planning to start a virtual cooking club and publish it on YouTube. We'll be carrying on with this, even though everything's starting to open up, including the church, because it wouldn't be wise for us to host 20 or 30 people in our 450 square foot apartment while the risk of coronavirus is still very present.
Well, that's all for now. Again, thank you for your love, kindness, and partnership with us as we share the good news of Jesus with the people of Okinawa. Bye.
Bye.
last Sunday on Mother's Day, we kicked off our baby bottle campaign, what we do every year to support the JFJ Hope Pregnancy Center. And already we've gotten a good response, but I just want to encourage you, again, their link will be in the description below, to go check them out and use this opportunity from Mother's Day to Father's Day to support them. Again, we're not passing out baby bottles this year. Everything is online, including the ability to give. Also, something that was started last week, which was started off with a great success. I know my kids really enjoyed it. But Anvita has taken the initiative to have a little video call on Zoom following the Sunday morning service here. So at 11 a.m., we're asking all the parents and children to come on, regardless of the age. Again, if your kids are a little bit too young to maybe respond to some of the questions, just mute them and watch them just enjoy the time. But we're going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes watching a story, a Bible story, and just having a fun time interacting with it as well. And so it's 11 a.m. Remember, don't go too far away after the service. Come back and enjoy that together. And then lastly, I just want to encourage us as a church just to continue to give online. Again, we've got many options to do that. This is always an act of worship that we never want to forsake or forget about. Again, God is using us in great times, and our givings also go a long way, especially during this time. And so you can do all that at the meadowschurch.ca/give. Let's jump into our parenting section. Always something I love to do with Haley. And we can enjoy and learn how we can better interact with our kids and even help other parents interact with our kids as well. Here we go.
Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome to the next segment with Pastor Graham and
Haley.
And we've been really enjoying this time together and this unique opportunity to do this during COVID-19 and just talk about parenting and help parents and kids. And hopefully this has been a blessing to you. Today we're going to talk about the importance of our words. And not necessarily their words, but our words. Watch this. Haley, how does it make you feel when I say, I love you?
Happy.
What about, I'm proud of you?
Happy.
And you can usually just see a change on Haley's face. Not all kids, but most kids are very sensitive to the words that we use. And I would say Haley's more sensitive than Isaiah is. And either responds positively or negatively to our words. But the reason our words are so important is because it shapes the way that Haley views the world, and not only views the world, but views herself. And that's what we want to talk about today. Naturally, we tend to believe that what we do equals who we are. And so based on their actions, their value, their view of themselves can change and go up and down and those kind of things. And so as parents, we actually need to fight against that natural belief when it comes to it, and our words really help with that. There's a good Bible verse. Our Bible verse for today, Haley's going to read for us from Galatians chapter 3, verse 26.
Galatians chapter 3, verse 26. For in Christ Jesus, you are all sons of God through faith.
Yeah, so when it comes to the gospel, one of the greatest things about the gospel is that our identity, about who we are, is not based on what we do, but on what Jesus has done for us, right?
Yeah.
And so if we put our faith in Jesus, what does that mean for us? What does the passage say? We are?
All sons of God.
We're all sons of God. Are you a son?
I'm not a boy. I'm a girl instead.
Mm-hmm. Well, when it says that, it's also including girls, okay?
Okay.
In the same way. And so we are children of God. Maybe we'll put it that way. And so we're children of God. And so when God looks at us, you know who he sees and how he treats us? He treats us like he treats Jesus.
Oh, yeah, because Jesus was his son.
Mm-hmm. And so in the exact same way, you know what the best thing about the gospel is? That God does not treat us the way that we deserve.
Yeah, he always
He treats us the way that Jesus deserves.
Does, and he also wants to treat us nice even if we do bad things.
Mm-hmm, because God loves us.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe I always try to test this out with Haley and reminder. Haley, what do you deserve?
Nothing.
Nothing! Wow, it worked. You've been listening. And so, yeah, we deserve nothing for what we've done. And so we want to make sure that this gospel truth is communicated to our kids. And it's very tricky, but it's done through our words. I know Julie and I try not to use the words, Haley, you're a good girl, or things of similar of that nature. The reason being is because when we say, hey, Haley, you are a good girl, or if she did something bad, you're a bad girl, then what that does is it connects your actions to her identity. Even from the very first day that you were born as a baby, you still couldn't do anything.
Yeah, it was like this. Can you carry me?
No, you didn't even say that? And so even from the very first day, we were proud of her, we loved her, and so nothing that she can do can change how much we love her, because the reason we love her is because she's our daughter, and not because of what she can do.
What
and
about
so,
Isaiah?
Yes, we love Isaiah too.
I know that.
When God treats us not the way that we deserve, the word for that is grace. In the same way we need to be gracious to our kids, we treat them not the way that they deserve, but we love them solely based on the fact that they are our children.
And also my middle name is Grace.
What? I planned that just for this video. So Haley, what did you learn today?
That God loves us the way he loves Jesus.
It's all based on grace. And so in parenting, we want to share that same grace that the Father gives to us. We want to give it to our kids as well. So we'll see you guys next week.
One with God, the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, and now revealed in you, the Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is, and nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus. You didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought hell down. The sin was great, your love was greater. What can separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. Come on, sing it out. Death could not hold you, veiled door before you. You silenced the most of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you were raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. stand against. What a powerful name it is, the name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is, the name of Jesus. Yeah, death could not hold you, they'll talk before you. You silenced them both, the sin and grace. Heavens unroaring, the praise of your glory, for you are raised to life again.
There was a movie that came out just a few years ago called The Big Short. It starred Christian Bale, and he played a man called Michael Burry. This is a real-life story that many of us live through, know very well, because it only happened about 12 years ago in 2008. It was the recession that our economy went through, and it was all built on this housing market crash. Everyone kept investing in homes. People were building homes. People were passing out loans very easily to be able to purchase a home. And everyone just had so much built up confidence that the housing market was just an easy investment. But Michael Burry, and there was a few other people as well in history, but Michael Burry was like one of the very, very few that looked at this situation and saw an opportunity to capitalize. He looked at the trends and he saw it very differently. He didn't think that the housing market was stable. In fact, he actually shorted or betted against the housing market, which everyone said was crazy. And so he was investing in his own money and other people's money as an investor and invested against the housing market. And guess what? As we know on this side of history, he won. If you look at investors at this period of time, and even today, the average annual margin that you would make is 3%. 3% of a growth on investment. That's kind of the average. Well, in that period of time, this is how much Michael Burry made. He made 489% of a margin on that. That's almost 500%. That's just crazy to think about how much of an advantage that he had because he saw things differently and took advantage at a very critical time in history. I think as a church, we're in a very similar place that he found himself in. That there's a unique time in history that we are currently living through. We have never really lived through this before. People have lots of different opinions. But the question is how as we as a church, how can we capitalize or use this unique time to advance God's kingdom? Jesus says a wonderful saying. He says this in the Gospels. He says that to his disciples, he says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. And so therefore, we need to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Now, there's 4 different animals that are kind of used in this illustration that Jesus tells for us as a church. But the key thing here is for us is to be cunning, is to be thoughtful, is to be wise, is to be innovative, is to be thinking cleverly through how can the gospel advance, especially in this unique time. And so that is exactly what we're going to look at today as we study, again, the life of the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts. And we're going to see he's very wise as a serpent. He's going to take advantage of his opportunities. He's going to look at his time and see things that no one else sees. And because of that, he's able to speak in a very finely pointed way and use it for the advancement of the gospel. And so as we go and dive into Acts chapter 22, I want us to continually think through how can you as an individual, how is we as a church, how can we use COVID-19? How can we use this unique situation in history to advance the gospel in a very wise and cunning way? There's so much to capitalize on here. At this opportunity, God is at work, and we're excited for what the future may bring. Open your Bibles to Acts chapter 22. We're going to start in verse 22. And we're going to look at two different stories that are back to back, but they actually have this exact same point. We're going to see in the first story, Paul uses some just one sentence, some very wise words at a very precise time to advance the gospel. And then we're going to see again in the second story, Paul does the exact same thing. And so for today, we're going to group those two stories together. I'm going to read both of them at once and look for Paul's cunning, look for his wisdom, look for him taking advantage of the precise time in a precise way for the advancement of the gospel. Let me read starting in verse 22. Now just remember, last week, the Apostle Paul told his testimony to these crowds who were initially trying to kill him, and now Paul is arrested, and this is how it carries on. It says in verse 22, "Up to this word they listened to him. Then they raised their voices and said, 'Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live.'" They hated Paul for what Paul believed in. And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust up into the air, the tribune, again the leader of the kind of Roman soldiers there, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging. I'm glad that doesn't happen in Canada. To find out why they were shouting against him like this. But when they had stretched him, Paul, out for whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." So the tribune came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he said, "Yes." And the tribune answered, I bought this citizenship for a large sum." And Paul said, "But I am a citizen by birth." So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen, that he had bound him. The second story, verse 30. It says, "But on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was accused by the Jews, he unbound him, the tribune unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet. And he brought Paul down and set him before them. And looking intently at the council, Paul said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law, you order me to be struck?" Those who stood by said, "Would you revile God's high priest?" And Paul said, "I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people.'" And now, when Paul perceived, interesting enough, he perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, this council of the Jewish leaders, he cried out to the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." And when he had said this, a dissension rose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angels, nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge all of them. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and sharply contended, "We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him?" And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from them by force, bring him into the barracks. Again, these are two very important stories for us, again, especially just in the timing that we find ourselves in today. COVID-19 has forced our church to change, to adapt. Some of those changes haven't been fun. Some of them have been very beneficial. And in the same way that Paul had this ministry going for a very long time, traveling from city to city with freedom, and now he finds himself in a very different situation where Paul could walk from city to city and travel. He is now in chains. He is now bound. He may feel in some ways that he's able to do less than what he was able to do before. But we know from the story as it continues on that Paul will do way more than he could ever ask or even imagine being in chains than he did when he was free. And in the same way, it is my prayer, my hope as we look at these stories and think through it very clearly, is that God would use us more so now than he's ever done before. We maybe felt like we were free before. Maybe we felt like we could meet and there was, great things happening. But I trust that there'll be even greater things that happen because of this COVID-19. And so let's look at those two stories, and we're going to look and see how Paul, in each of the two stories, he uses one sentence to change the entire situation he is found in. One sentence. It's kind of like, if you have a bow and arrow and you're just shooting it and you hit the bullseye, this is exactly what Paul has done. And so the first story, again, the Jewish crowd has had enough of Paul. They've heard him. Paul is able to tell us his testimony. They reject it. It even causes them more anger and more hatred towards Paul. They want Paul dead. And so Paul is then taken away, and the Roman soldiers, the first thing that they do, again, I'm grateful that they're not doing this nowadays, but in order to get answers out of Paul, they start to beat him, specifically by flogging. Now, you might be familiar with flogging because the same thing happens to Jesus. And we're going to see a lot of similar things happening to Paul that happened to Jesus, and one of these is flogging, where it's kind of like whips, but it tears away your skin. And so this is some very deep, difficult suffering and torture that Paul is about to endure. And Paul has endured lots of suffering before. He's been shipwrecked, he's been beaten, he's been stoned, he's been, tossed out of cities, barely alive. People thought he was dead. That's how close to death he was. They thought he was actually dead by the beatings. And so Paul is familiar to suffering. And it's interesting, he has very rarely ever tried to avoid suffering. But unlike Jesus, who actually says nothing and gets flogged, Paul is going to say something and not get flogged. He's going to avoid the suffering. Now, here's the reality. Again, for us in our culture, who we love to avoid suffering, we do a lot to avoid pain and challenges in our culture. Paul's not about avoiding suffering. He's not about avoiding the challenges that come from sharing the gospel. But he sees that by avoiding this flogging, he can better and greater advance the gospel. And so it's not about avoiding suffering. It is about advancing the gospel. And so just as they were about to flog him, Paul says these specific, precise, again, seeing what no one else sees, he says these words. And he says, hey, do you know that I'm a Roman citizen? Now it's interesting. Paul didn't bring this up before. Paul barely brings this up in previous ministries. He never or very rarely anyways, brings up this to avoid suffering. But here he does. And Roman citizenship was a key deal in this day. As the Tribune says, he says, I paid a great deal for his citizenship. If you were a Roman citizen, you got a great pass on a lot of things. You were already in the upper kind of threshold of the culture, the community. People would respect you, had benefits that no one else would. And it's interesting, not like Canada, not like our world today. Just because you're born into a country doesn't mean you got citizenship here. You either need to be born into a very prestigious family, or you had to go and spend lots and lots of money to buy it. And so the average person just didn't have any citizenship. So for Paul, this was something that was so unique, so important, and Paul doesn't, again, use it to avoid his sufferings. He uses his rights to advance the gospel. And so he does this, and then they stop, and because of this, he's able to go back to the Jewish leaders and tell them once again about Jesus and about what the gospel is all about. And so now the tribune is trying to think through, well, what do I do with Paul? And now Paul's got more time on his hands. And then we get to the next story where he's brought before this council. And it's very interesting. Paul, at the beginning, he's got some very harsh words, again, very similar to Jesus. Jesus calls the Pharisees a whitewashed tomb. And in the same way, Paul does the same thing here. But this is kind of the interesting story. It says in verse 6, which I think is very key for us. It says, Paul took the time to look around. He took the time to study what his surroundings were like, what the culture was. He understood that the differences between these two groups of leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He knew his culture and he knew the people he was reaching out to well. And if we don't know the culture, if we don't know what's happening around us, if we don't know the people we're trying to reach, then it's actually very difficult to say anything wise, anything with precision, to really hit that bullseye and take advantage of what is taking place. Again, thinking back to Michael Burry, if he had no idea about the housing market, if he didn't bother to look into it and study it, then he wouldn't have been able to take advantage of it. And so Paul, he looks and he sees these differences, and he knows that there is one key tension that will divide these people and cause them to fight. And even says later on, violently fight. This verbal argument goes physical because of this. And it's because of the resurrection. And so Paul could have said, when they asked him, why are you on trial? He could have said, the gospel. He could have said Jesus Christ. He could have said a number of things. But he says it in such a way to create this tension. He says it's about the resurrection. And that is true. The gospel is about us believing in Jesus and Jesus' death. As Jesus raised again from his death and overcame death, that is what we are putting our hope and our trust in. That we too will be raised again from the dead because of the power of Jesus. And so in the same way, he specifically targets this. And then look, the whole trial turns from being all about Paul to being all about each other. And Paul now again escapes this situation. It's very interesting, again, what God is doing through Paul. But Paul perceives what's around him, trusts in God, and speaks with wisdom and cunning and craftiness to take advantage of the opportunity and the situation that he currently finds himself in. Now, there's one last verse in this passage that I haven't read yet. And it's Acts chapter 23, verses 11. Look at this. It says, the following night the Lord stood by him and said, take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, you must also testify in Rome. And so in the same way that Paul is on this greater mission, that he thought his mission was to just go and share the gospel in Jerusalem. Well, Jesus says, I'm going to use you not just there, but even in greater ways to go to Rome, the center of the known world at this point in time, to tell the gospel. And so again, this is my question for us, for you and to me. And it's both an individual question for yourself, but also a church-wide question for all of us. Is this, how are we going to maximize the time and the opportunities that we have because of COVID-19 to see God do something amazing? Let's first think individually. What is going on in your life? What are some open doors? What are some opportunities that God has caused or created because of COVID-19? Maybe you have unique opportunities. Maybe you have more time. Maybe you have a new relationship. Maybe you have a new opportunity to serve or bless people in ways that you never thought of before. You need to, just like Paul, perceive what is around you. Who are the people that God has brought into your life? What are the opportunities that are before you? and use it then, like Paul, not to avoid suffering, but to advance the gospel. Maybe it will result in a loss of finances. Maybe it will result in more hard work. Maybe it will result in your family being pushed into uncomfortable times and uncomfortable situations. Well, those are good as long as it's for the advancement of the gospel. But second, let's think about this as a church for a while. Again, COVID-19 has caused us as a church to be creative. We have gone through already a transition of going from meeting in person to meeting online. We're used to using Zoom now for our missional communities to meet throughout the week. We're used to using this platform, Church Online, to meet on Sunday. We're able to send in videos, make special things. We're able to have phone calls with people that we used to never have before. I'm spending a lot more time on the phone and having a lot more conversation with you and various other people that maybe would have been 10 minutes before, but maybe it's now 30, 40 minutes because of the opportunities that COVID-19 has presented. And so the question is, as things begin to reopen, we don't want to go back to normal. This is the reality. Not only do we not want to go back to normal, we can't go back to normal. There is not going to be the same normals as in tomorrow that there was yesterday. Things have changed, and things have changed for the forever, and hopefully we can say have changed for good. And so the question is as we're remaking now what our church and even what our culture is going to look like in the months and the weeks and the years to come, what are those unique opportunities that we can take advantage of? As a church, I want you to dream with me. I want you to think through this with me. Pray with this through with me. I think I just want to speak to three kind of key things that I've already seen have been a great change and a great help. And we want to think, how do we continue to carry that forward? The first one is this, is being able to meet online on Sunday morning, to be able to use this platform to be able to talk. Obviously, there's pros and cons. Obviously, there are things that we're missing out on a meeting in person, but there's also new opportunities here. We have about an average for the last since Easter, last number of weeks, about 20 people watching live. Now, that not necessarily people, but viewership. And what they kind of tell you in the stats is to take that number of viewership and multiply it by at least 2. The reality is that even for yourself, maybe you're watching this with a spouse, maybe you're watching this with your kids, maybe you're watching this by yourself. But that kind of average, if you take all that, I know I got myself and my wife, my kids, and Emma, who's living with us too at this point in time. All 5 of us are watching one screen, right? So that's 5 for one. And so if you do the math, that's at least 40 people. And so when you think about our average on Sunday morning before, that's more, maybe not too much more, but depending on how many people are actually watching and watching from all over, this is a great opportunity for the gospel message to go out. And that's something we don't want to lose, and that's something we want to continue to see grow and advance. And the other reality is that you can literally share this and invite more and more people to come and watch this on Sundays. And that's what I would strongly encourage you to do this week. It's amazing as I continue to think about this, how many people, especially in our neighborhood with Muslims and Hindus, would feel comfortable coming and joining us on a Sunday morning. It usually takes people months, it usually takes deep relationships for them to be willing to come out even once. But guess what? People are watching this online now. People are watching this without their families knowing, without their neighbors knowing, without us knowing. They are watching this, and hopefully you have friends as well that are watching this, or even you are watching this for the very first time. And you would never come to a church, but now you're hearing the teachings of Jesus, and it's speaking to you. God is using this for your good and for the advancement of the gospel. And so for us, let's utilize this time that we have now, but let's think about how we can utilize the internet and utilize this on Sunday morning as we continue to go forward. The second one is giving online. Giving needs to be consistent. It needs to be done well. It needs to be done thoughtfully. And honestly, I think giving online creates that environment to do that. We can think through how much do we want to give, not just this Sunday, but in the Sundays to come. and make that commitment online and say, hey, I'm going to give this amount for the rest of the year or for the next 6 months. And you can easily make that commitment. Before, when we were just giving online, it was always that fight each and every week. Do I really want to fulfill that? Do I not? And so giving consistently. The other side of this too is that we've had less expenses for the last couple months. And so that reality too is the more we give, then the more we can be generous about it with others because we don't have as much expenses to look after. And the last one, I think probably the most important one, is I hope that we are realizing the importance of missional communities. We've always emphasized since the beginning of our church that God is not about the Sunday morning, He is about the everyday. Sunday plays a very key critical role. It's the start of the week. We get refocused on God and we get sent out on His mission, but we live that mission out in community, in smaller groups of other families in the church. And especially over the next months to come, we might be able to meet as missional communities, but not meet on Sunday morning. And so they're going to play an even more vital role. And so I really just want to encourage you to dive deep into these relationships. Dive deep, join online, join on the Zoom calls. When we're able to get back and start meeting in smaller groups and missional communities, do it. Take advantage of it. That's where we care for one another. That's where we're supporting one another. That's where we're discipling one another. That's also how we're reaching out into our neighborhood and our communities. And so I just see, especially pairing this with Sunday morning, it is so critical and so important for us to take advantage of our missional communities and live in them and commit to them and actually live out what Christ has laid out for us in the book of Acts and all throughout the New Testament. And so again, one of my last asks is to dream with me. Think through what will it look like. Be willing to change things up. Be willing to open up and say, let's perceive what is taking place around us and use it for the advancement of the gospel. Just like the Apostle Paul, he's looking around and he's saying one sentence, a couple things, and he uses it and God changes the whole situation, opens things up to not just be used in Jerusalem, but be used in Rome and all over the known world. That is my prayer. That is my hope. Again, it is a little scary as we think through this for us as a church, but I am so excited that if we have an open heart, God will use us in new ways, in unique ways, to advance the gospel, to see our church be even more stronger and bigger and growing than it's ever been before. Again, pray that prayer with me right now. God, we thank you for your love and your care and what you've done in us over the last couple months. We thank you, God, for even opening my heart to new ideas that I would have never even considered before. But as we look around at this COVID-19 situation and trying to think through what post-COVID-19 is going to look like, I pray, God, for an openness for me, from the leaders, from everyone in the church, to ask this question of how can we still be committed to your word and the way that you've designed our church to be, and yet still advancing the gospel in new and unique ways. I pray for you to illuminate that in our minds this week as individuals and as a church. May you create new avenues, and may we see, again, your gospel grow and expand, all because of this challenging time that we are currently in. And we pray this all in your name. Amen. Well, thank you so much for joining us online today. Whether you're watching live or watching later, we hope that you feel the presence of God. You know that God's at work and that you can trust in Jesus Christ. Again, this is a very unique time, and I'm excited. There's a little bit of fear, but I'm excited about what God is doing and what our church and what even the church across the world is going to look like after COVID-19. And so dream with me, pray with me. I love to hear your ideas. And even if you don't have ideas, I'd love to just talk with you and hear a little bit about what you're thinking in regards to what does it look like for the church to respond in a post-COVID-19 world. So we're praying for you this week. We're excited to see what God is going to do even in this week. And again, for parents and kids, stick around. Again, 11 a.m. We're going to jump back on here on Zoom, and we're going to enjoy a time together learning more about Jesus.